let's start to get public comments. There are people here with public comments. Ms. Lopez, Calaveras County Water District. Let us test that mic first to see if it's on.
Can you hear me?
You sure can. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad I came today as an upstream agency. There was a lot of mention of upstream agency. But first of all, I just want to thank the Delta Stewardship Council staff. It's been a long process. Their work has been very diligent. They've worked very closely with all of us. And we have been a very vocal group, and they've been very patient. And we just want to thank all of them for all the work that they put into it and for all your patience. Councilwoman Gray earlier mentioned if there were any specific languages from the Ag-Urban group on the governance. And we did provide some concept and some specifics in the alternate plan, and we look forward to working with your staff and the council to vet that further to be very specific, because I think tasks and timeline is really important. And I know Councilwoman Marcus has said that from the very beginning. You really want some teeth in the governance, and we look forward to working with you on that level. Regarding the implementation committee, one thing that we just want to add is in the statute, in the water code, it says implementation committee consists of implementation agencies. And we just ask you to consider including those that will be impacted, the on-the-ground players that have to live with this day in, day out. Because anything that you implement will not be successful unless you go through what will work, what will not work. And we know that the group has to be manageable so that it can be productive, but having cross-section representation up and down the state, different stakeholders will make that implementation committee a very valuable tool going forward. And to the topic of covered action, I was encouraged to hear that it is very specific, it's geographic. I do understand the argument about things being integrated, and I think we all know that this Delta plan will evolve, just like any other plan. It's not a static document. And what's important is this is new for a lot of people. Delta is not new, but this plan has really aligned the efforts of various agencies up and down the state, and I think you have a very captive audience. And yes, there's a lot of concern. We're not scared. We are concerned because it does have very direct impact to our community. And there is no desire not to be cooperative. But it is important that as we go into something like this, in order to have a successful plan, you need buy-in. And to covered action, if you start with specifics, as the statute states, it is whole or in part in the Delta boundary. And as we live with this document, as we work together through the implementation committee and other processes, we can always revisit this. We can always relook at it. We could always say, well, there are other issues. If there is significant impact, even if it's not in the boundaries, how do we deal with that? So this is a continuous process. And I think in order for everyone to go into this believing in it and having some clarity, it's okay to start with what the statute says and be that specific. And just recognize that we have to have further conversation about this. This is not our only opportunity to describe covered action. But as a starter, we should be very clear, and I do agree with what your staff has recommended, that it should be tied to geographic definition that's contained in the statute. The WRP1, reduced reliance, you've heard many times, reduced reliance, what does that mean? It varies depending on which part of the state you live in. And for upstream agency, it is truly the only source for us. Desalination is not an option for obvious reasons. Recycling, we do a lot of recycling. There's some, I think, notion that maybe some of these agencies upstreams don't really value conservation or don't really pay attention or do a whole lot. And I think that's a misconception because we do a lot. We do understand the importance. And not only is it because there's state mandates and legislation, but it is the right thing to do. And people, by and large, are very responsible to that regard. And so we are doing a lot. When it comes to recycling, our little agency, for our entire service area, 15% of our supply is met with recycled water. As a matter of fact, we offer recycled water for free, which doesn't happen in Southern California. So we do a lot, and that's just an example of it. But to do some of these high-tech efficiency measures, even something like water budget that has been very successful in Southern California, it's very cost prohibitive in our region because the economy is different. So you have to look at what is practical, what can we support financially. And so for that reason, we just ask you to consider that. We need clarity right now. Again, another thing that we can look at going forward, maybe we can do more, but tying it to what we know today, the 20 by 2020, the California Urban Water Conservation Council, BMP requirements, all those things are things that we are living with, that we could put our hands around, and it gives us a starting point, and it gives us a little bit of familiarity before we start treading into some unknown territories. I got 2 more points. WR5, all feasible. And I know there's some concern, well, if you don't really get too specific, will these guys do what they're supposed to? And we do. In talking to a lot of water agencies, by and large, again, very responsible, understand the issues, the importance of conservation. So there is no desire to somehow find a loophole and not work within the expectations that you and even all of us in the state have envisioned for us in terms of water supply reliability. So tying it again to Urban Water Management Plan, the BMP's Integrated Regional Water Management Plan, the 20 by 2020, those are all existing mechanisms. There are agencies that oversees that, and yes, maybe DWR, because they're very understaffed, may not go page by page on the Urban Water Management Plan, but they do review it. And it's one of those things where rather than putting it upon the agencies that submit, this is again going back to governance where the Delta Stewardship Council could lean on Department of Water Resources and saying if these are the things that are within the Urban Water Management Plan, it needs to be reviewed and assessed for a reasonable requirement or not. And within the Urban Water Management Plan, as you know, there's an extensive part of that deals with best management practices. The last part is the ERP1, and again, I do understand some of the concerns. We are very pleased that the cease issuance of all water rights, sort of I call it the hostage language. I'm glad that's removed. I mean, the date should stay as far as when the flow criteria should be developed, but if one agency doesn't do what they're supposed to, you should not hold someone else accountable. That starts getting into area where we can't plan and we can't have any kind of hopes of economic recovery. And I'm not going to really stay on this point because I've already given very extensive testimony about this particular section. And again, the dates are fine, but we really strongly encourage you to follow your staff's recommendation and strike out the recommendation that deals with stopping all water rights issuance. And recommendation, and I've said this before, recommendation coming from this body is very powerful. It's not just something people recommend that, the legislature or other agencies can do or do without. They look at your recommendation with a great deal of weight. So it's important that as you develop recommendation that it's almost equivalent to policy from the eyes of people like myself, because we kind of envision recommendation turning into policy, and that's okay. But we just want to make sure that you take that into consideration because sometimes I think there may be good reason to be stronger in the recommendation, but not to get too far ahead because, again, if it turns into something that's policy, it's going to cause a lot of concern, and we can talk about it. Again, through the implementation group, we can talk about a lot of things. We could add future recommendations and policy. But hopefully we can start with a document that at least we have some level of comfort and clarity and look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lopez. Ms.